July 6th, 1943, 01:57 a.m., Kula Gulf, Solomon Islands. Rear Admiral Teruo Akiyama stood on the bridge of the destroyer Niizuki, watching his radar operator's face go pale in the dim red light. American cruisers, range 24 kilometers. They're closing fast. Akiyama felt ice in his stomach. He knew which American ship led that formation. Every Japanese naval officer in the Solomons knew her by reputation. USS Helena, the ship with the guns that sounded like a machine saw tearing through steel. What happened in the next 8 minutes would shock the Imperial Japanese Navy and cement one American light cruiser's place in naval legend. Helena would fire 1,500 shells in 5 minutes. Her radar-directed guns would obliterate a flagship before its crew could react. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, Japanese torpedoes would send her to the bottom of Kula Gulf. But this isn't just a story about one ship or one battle. This is about how American technology transformed naval warfare, how one crew's determination survived against impossible odds, and how democracy made steel that refused to die. The story begins not in the Solomon Islands, but in the smoke-filled conference rooms of the London Naval Treaty Negotiations in 1930. As the world's naval powers sat down to limit the arms race that had defined the previous decade, American designers faced a puzzle. How do you build a light cruiser that can defeat Japanese heavy cruisers while staying within treaty limits? The answer was radical. Abandon the big guns. Pack more smaller guns, fire faster. Traditional naval thinking said bigger was better. 8-inch guns on heavy cruisers could punch through armor at long range. But American designers did the math differently. A ship with 15 6-inch guns, they calculated, could put more steel in the air than one with 9 8-inch guns. Rate of fire would overcome individual shell weight. The breakthrough came when intelligence revealed Japan's next cruiser class, the Mogamis, would carry 15 6-inch guns in 5 triple turrets. The Americans matched the count, but went one step further. They would make those guns fire faster than anything afloat. The Brooklyn class was born from this calculation. 9 ships built between 1935 and 1939, each carrying democracy's answer to Japanese aggression. 5 triple turrets, 15 6-inch Mark 16 guns, and fire control systems that would revolutionize naval combat. Helena was the 9th and final member of the class, but she and her sister St. Louis incorporated critical improvements. The earlier Brooklyns had a weakness. Their machinery was concentrated in long compartments, meaning a single torpedo could knock out half the ship's power. Helena's designers arranged her 8 boilers and 4 turbine sets in alternating compartments, hit one engine room, and 3 others kept her moving. It was called the unit system, and it would save countless lives. Her keel was laid at the New York Navy Yard on December 9, 1936. The hull that slid into the East River on August 28, 1938, weighed 10,000 tons empty and stretched 607 feet, longer than 2 football fields. But it was what went inside that hull that mattered. Captain Robert English took command when Helena was commissioned on September 18, 1939. That same month, Germany invaded Poland. The world was going to war, and Helena was going to need every advantage her designers had built into her. December 7, 1941, 07:55 a.m., Pearl Harbor, Territory of Hawaii. Helena sat moored in berth 1010, the spot usually reserved for the battleship Pennsylvania. Tied alongside was the mine layer Oglala. The crew was preparing for another day of maintenance. Some men were eating breakfast. Others were writing letters home. None of them knew that 183 Japanese aircraft were about to arrive overhead. 3 minutes into the attack, a Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber dropped its weapon at what its pilot believed was Pennsylvania. The Japanese aviator couldn't know he'd made a fatal mistake. The torpedo ran true, passing under Oglala's shallow draft and slamming into Helena's starboard side nearly mid-ship. The explosion was catastrophic. A geyser of water and oil shot 200 feet into the air. The starboard engine and boiler rooms flooded instantly. Wiring for the main and secondary guns severed. The lights went out across the ship. In the sudden darkness, Helena's crew raced to their stations. They had 2 minutes to get the guns firing or die helpless at their berths. Chief Electrician's mate Thomas Reeves ran through flooded passageways to the forward diesel generator room. His hands worked controls in pitch darkness, muscle memory from 1,000 drills. The backup generator roared to life. Power flowed back into the gun directors. 2 minutes after the torpedo hit, Helena's guns opened fire. Seaman First Class William Mann, manning a .50 caliber gun on the port side, watched another torpedo bomber line up for its attack run. The pilot came in low, maybe 600 yards out, his torpedo clearly visible beneath the aircraft's belly. Mann's guns chattered. Tracers arced toward the bomber. The pilot wavered, released his torpedo too early, too high. It struck the transformer station on the pier and exploded harmlessly. 3 more torpedoes came at Helena. Every one missed, driven off course by the ship's withering anti-aircraft fire or burying themselves in the harbor mud.
Then the dive bombers arrived. Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers shrieked down through the smoke, their fixed landing gear making them look like predatory birds. Helena's 5-inch guns barked defiance, filling the sky with flak bursts. The 1.1-inch Chicago piano quad mounts added their distinctive hammering sound. Even the .50 caliber guns poured fire upward. Bomb after bomb fell toward Helena. Each one missed. Near misses erupted in the water around her, geysers of white water rising higher than her mast. One bomb struck the pier. Another crashed into the harbor 20 feet from her starboard side. A third landed so close the explosion buckled plates in her hull, but the armor belt held. Through 2 hours of attack, Helena's guns never stopped firing. 375 rounds from the 5-inch battery. 3,000 rounds from the 1.1-inch guns. 5,000 rounds from the machine guns. 6 Japanese aircraft fell from the sky, claimed by Helena's gunners. When the attack ended, 26 of Helena's crew were dead. Another 66 were wounded. The torpedo had blown a hole in her hull 15 feet across. Her starboard machinery spaces were flooded. Oil leaked from ruptured fuel tanks. She was hurt, but she was alive. More importantly, she was angry. 2 days after the attack, divers sealed the worst of the torpedo damage with timber and steel patches. On December 31st, Helena was refloated and prepared for the journey to California. The trip to Mare Island Naval Shipyard took 8 days, the wounded cruiser moving carefully through waters now crawling with Japanese submarines. She entered dry dock number 3 on January 19, 1942. What emerged 6 months later was a different ship. The torpedo hull was cut away and new steel welded in its place, stronger than the original. The flooded compartments were gutted, cleaned, and rebuilt. But the real transformation was in her weapons and sensors. The old Mark 33 fire-controlled director was replaced with the new Mark 37, equipped with FD radar. This system could track aircraft and direct gunfire with precision impossible to human eyes alone. For the main battery, an FC radar set was installed, giving Helena the ability to engage surface targets in complete darkness with deadly accuracy. The anti-aircraft battery was completely rebuilt. Gone were the troublesome 1.1-inch guns that had performed so well at Pearl Harbor but were now obsolete. In their place came 16 40mm Bofors guns in quad mounts, Swedish-designed weapons that fired explosive shells at 160 rounds per minute per gun. 8 20mm Oerlikon cannons supplemented them, creating a defensive bubble no Japanese aircraft could survive. Most dramatically, the armored conning tower was removed entirely. That 30-ton steel box had protected admirals in the battleship era, but it blocked visibility and trapped heat. An open bridge took its place, giving commanders a 360-degree view of the battle space. The weight saved allowed Helena to carry more radar equipment, more ammunition, more of everything that would keep her alive in combat. When she emerged from dry dock on July 4, 1942, she carried the most advanced fire control system in the U.S. Navy. But technology alone wouldn't win battles. The crew needed to learn how to use it. Captain Gilbert Hoover took command of Helena in June 1942. A 1911 Naval Academy graduate, Hoover had spent 30 years preparing for this command. He looked at his modernized ship and saw a weapon unlike any other in the fleet. Helena could fire faster than any cruiser afloat. Her 15 6-inch guns could each fire 10 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. In practice, her gun crews achieved 8 to 9 rounds per minute consistently.
That meant Helena could fire 120 to 135 6-inch shells every 60 seconds. To put that in perspective, a typical heavy cruiser firing 8-inch guns might manage 4 rounds per gun per minute, 32 shells total. Helena could put 4 times as much steel in the air. But speed of fire meant nothing without accuracy. That's where the new FC radar changed everything. Traditional naval gunnery relied on optical rangefinders and human calculation. Find the enemy, measure the range, calculate the trajectory, fire. Observe the splashes, correct, fire again. The process took minutes, and at night it was nearly impossible. Helena's FC radar could see in the dark. It could track moving targets. It could calculate range, bearing, and rate of change continuously. Feed that data into the Mark 37 director, and the guns would track the target automatically. In August 1942, Helena's crew drilled obsessively in San Francisco Bay. Night firing exercises, radar tracking, emergency maneuvers. Over and over until the crew could transition from radar contact to firing solution in less than 30 seconds. Chief Fire Controlman First Class William Reed ran the Combat Information Center like an orchestra conductor. Radar operators called out ranges and bearings, plotters tracked contacts on the board. Reed translated it all into firing solutions that flowed to the gun directors faster than any Japanese ship could react.
"We're going to own the night," Hoover told his officers. "The Japanese think they're the masters of night combat. We're going to teach them differently." On August 30th, Helena departed San Francisco as part of a convoy bound for the South Pacific. She carried a contingent of Seabees, construction battalions that would build the airstrips and bases needed to push back the Japanese tide. But her real cargo was something more valuable, the ability to turn darkness into an American advantage. October 11, 1942, 11:30 p.m., off Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal. Rear Admiral Norman Scott commanded Task Force 64, 4 cruisers and 5 destroyers steaming in line ahead formation. Helena was third in line, behind San Francisco and Boise. Scott's mission was simple: intercept a Japanese reinforcement convoy bringing troops to Guadalcanal. Intelligence said the Japanese were coming. What intelligence didn't say was exactly where or when. In Helena's Combat Information Center, the radar operators watched their scopes in the red-lit darkness. At 11:25 p.m., a contact appeared. Range 28,000 yards, bearing 315 degrees. Multiple ships in column. Reed's voice was calm over the intercom. "Bridge, CIC, radar contact, multiple surface targets northwest. Recommend course 270 to close." The Japanese force consisted of 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers. They had no idea the Americans were there. No radar, no warning, just human eyes straining through tropical darkness. At 11:46 p.m., Scott's flagship San Francisco finally spotted the Japanese visually. The admiral ordered his column to turn left, crossing the enemy's T, the perfect tactical position where all American guns could bear, while the Japanese could only fire from their forward turrets. But in the confusion of the turn, San Francisco's signal lights got crossed. One destroyer captain thought the order meant something different and turned the wrong direction. Another didn't see the signal at all. Helena's radar operators tracked every ship with mechanical precision. They knew exactly where the Japanese were. They knew the range. They knew the firing solution. "Request permission to open fire," Captain Hoover transmitted to San Francisco. Silence. The Japanese were less than 5,000 yards away now, close enough to see with binoculars in the tropical night. Still no order to fire. "Request permission to open fire," Hoover repeated, his voice tight with frustration. More silence. Scott was confused by the destroyer's maneuvering. He thought the radar contacts might be his own destroyers out of position. At 11:46 p.m., Japanese searchlights snapped on, illuminating the American column. The enemy had finally seen them. "Commence firing," Scott ordered. Helena's 15 6-inch guns erupted in a rippling crash that lit the night like lightning. The first salvo was away before the echo of the order faded. 8 seconds later, the second salvo fired. 8 seconds after that, the third. The Japanese cruiser Ooba, caught in Helena's fire, seemed to come apart under the hammer blows. 6-inch shells penetrated her thin deck armor and exploded inside. Her forward turrets exploded in cascades of orange flame. Her bridge disintegrated. Fire spread along her length. Helena's gun crews worked like machines. Load, fire, load, fire. The rhythm never broke. Shell casings piled up around the turrets, brass cylinders still hot enough to burn flesh. Powder smoke filled the compartments despite the ventilation fans running at maximum. 15 minutes into the action, the Japanese destroyer Fubuki took a concentration of fire from multiple American ships. Helena's shells were part of the deluge that tore the destroyer apart. She capsized and sank in minutes, taking most of her crew with her. The Japanese cruiser Furutaka, also hammered by multiple American ships, including Helena, caught fire and fell out of formation. She would sink 4 hours later, her crew abandoning ship as flames reached her magazines. By 12:30 a.m., the Japanese had broken off and fled. The Battle of Cape Esperance was over. The Americans had won the first surface action of the Pacific War, and Helena had proven that radar-directed night firing was not science fiction, it was the future of naval warfare. Captain Hoover walked through his ship as dawn broke. The 5-inch guns were blackened from continuous firing. Expended shell casings covered the decks. The air stank of powder smoke and hot metal.
But Helena was undamaged, not a scratch. She had poured fire into the enemy for 15 minutes straight and emerged untouched. November 13th, 1942, 01:24 a.m., Iron Bottom Sound. This time, the Japanese came with overwhelming force. 2 fast battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, escorted by a light cruiser and 11 destroyers. Their mission? Bombard Henderson Field and destroy the aircraft that were making Japanese resupply impossible. The American force was outgunned. 5 cruisers, including Helena, and 8 destroyers against 2 battleships. But the Americans had radar, and they had Helena. Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan commanded from San Francisco. The American column steamed north through Iron Bottom Sound, a narrow passage between Guadalcanal and Savo Island. In the darkness, the 2 forces approached each other at a combined speed of 60 knots. At 01:24 a.m., Helena's radar picked up the Japanese formation. Range, 27,000 yards. Bridge, CIC. Multiple radar contacts bearing 345, large capital ships. This is it. Captain Hoover ordered his crew to battle stations. Men who had been dozing at their stations snapped alert. In the turrets, gun crews checked their ammunition hoists one final time. In the magazines far below, handling crews stood ready to feed shells to the guns faster than the enemy could react. The range closed, 20,000 yards, 15,000 yards, 10,000 yards. In San Francisco, Admiral Callahan stared into the darkness, unable to see what his radar was clearly showing him. He hesitated, unsure if the contacts were friendly destroyers or enemy ships. Helena knew. Her radar painted every ship with mathematical certainty. The large contacts were battleships. The smaller ones were destroyers. They were Japanese, and they were close enough to kill. 5,000 yards, less than 3 miles. At 01:48 a.m., Japanese searchlights blazed on, illuminating the American column. For a moment, both sides could see each other in perfect clarity. Then all hell broke loose. Helena opened fire first, her 15 guns launching 100-pound shells at the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki. The searchlight ship died instantly, torn apart by shell fire from multiple American vessels. But Helena's guns were already shifting to new targets. The battleship Hiei loomed out of the darkness like a mountain of steel. Her 14-inch guns swiveled toward the American cruisers, but before she could fire, Helena's 6-inch shells began hammering her superstructure. The bridge took multiple hits. The fire control director exploded. Heiei's pagoda mast, containing vital command and control facilities, became a blazing wreck. The battle dissolved into chaos. Ships on both sides maneuvered wildly, trying to avoid collision while bringing guns to bear. Torpedoes crisscrossed the water. Shells arced through the darkness, their passage marked by tracers and the orange flash of detonations. Helena steamed through the center of it all, her guns never stopping. Her fire control team tracked targets, shifted fire, engaged new threats with mechanical efficiency. The Japanese had numbers and weight of metal. Helena had radar and rate of fire. Destroyer Amatsake took a full broadside from Helena and broke in half, sinking in seconds. Destroyer Udachi, already damaged by other American ships, received Helena's attention and exploded, her torpedoes cooking off in a fireball that lit the entire sound. 24 minutes of pure violence. Then the Japanese broke off and fled north, leaving burning wrecks behind them. Heiei, her steering damaged and her fire control destroyed, circled helplessly until dawn. American dive bombers found her at first light and finished what Helena's guns had started. The battleship sank that afternoon, the first Japanese battleship lost in the Pacific War. As dawn broke on November 13th, Helena's crew took stock. They had fired over 800 6-inch shells in less than half an hour. Her barrels glowed red from the heat. Powder residue coated every surface, but Helena was unscratched. The crew knew they had participated in something historic. They had helped stop a Japanese battleship force, saved Henderson Field, and turned the tide at Guadalcanal. They had no idea that their finest hour and their last was still ahead. By June 1943, the Allies were pushing northwest up the Solomon Chain. The next target was New Georgia, a strategic island that would bring American forces within striking distance of the major Japanese base at Rabaul. Helena, now under command of Captain Charles O. Cecil, was part of Task Force 18 under Rear Admiral Walden Pug Ainsworth. Their mission was to support the New Georgia landings by bombarding Japanese positions and intercepting enemy reinforcement runs.
The Japanese called their resupply missions the Tokyo Express, fast destroyer runs that brought troops and supplies under cover of darkness, then withdrew before American aircraft could attack at dawn. American sailors called it the Rat Run. On the night of July 4th, 5th, Helena participated in a bombardment of Japanese positions on the New Georgia coast. Her guns hurled shell after shell into enemy installations, destroying supply dumps, gun positions, and troop concentrations. She expended her flashless propellant charges, special powder that reduced muzzle flash for night firing. The next night, July 5th, 6th, would be different. Intelligence reported that 10 Japanese destroyers were making a reinforcement run to Kolombangara Island in Kula Gulf. 7 of them carried 2,400 troops. The other 3 were escorts. Ainsworth's force moved to intercept. 3 cruisers, Honolulu, St. Louis, and Helena, plus 4 destroyers. 14 American ships against 10 Japanese destroyers. On paper, the Americans held the advantage. Reality would prove far more complex. July 6, 1943. 00:30 a.m. Approaching Kula Gulf. Helena steamed in the center of the American cruiser column, her position as tail end Charlie giving her the widest field of fire. Every watertight door was sealed. All lights were extinguished. The crew wore flash protective gear and life jackets. Battle stations had been manned for hours. In the Combat Information Center, radar operators watched their scopes. The visibility was terrible. Heavy cloud cover blocked even starlight, but radar could see through clouds. At 1:06 a.m., the Japanese destroyer Niizuki detected the American force on her own radar at 13 nautical miles. Rear Admiral Teruo Akiyama
flying his flag from Niizuki, had a choice to make. His 7 transport destroyers were already unloading troops on Kolumbongara. He could run immediately, or he could buy them time to complete the mission. Akiyama chose to fight. He took his flagship, Suzuki, and Tanikaze forward to observe the Americans while the other destroyers continued unloading. It was a fatally brave decision. At 1:36 a.m., Helena's radar painted the 3 Japanese escorts off Kolumbongara, range 24,000 yards and closing. Ainsworth maneuvered his cruiser column into line-ahead formation, the classic naval formation that allowed every ship to fire full broadsides. The American destroyers Nicholas and O'Bannon moved ahead of the cruisers to screen against torpedo attack. The Japanese completed their unloading and raced to join Akiyama's escorts. Now 10 destroyers were forming up to attack 3 American cruisers. At 1:57 a.m., with the range closed to 8,000 yards, Ainsworth gave the order, "Open fire." Helena's fire control radar locked on to the lead Japanese destroyer, Niizuki, Akiyama's flagship. The firing solution flowed to all 5 turrets simultaneously. In the turrets, gun captains verified the solution, checked ammunition loads, and reported ready. "All batteries ready," the talker reported to Captain Cecil. "Commence rapid continuous fire," Cecil ordered. Helena's 15 guns fired almost simultaneously, the flash lighting the dark gulf like a lightning strike. Before the shells reached their target, the next salvo was ready. The guns fired in a rolling cascade: Turret 1, Turret 2, Turret 3, Turret 4, Turret 5, each spitting 300-pound shells toward the enemy at 2,500 feet per second. Aboard Niizuki, Akiyama had perhaps 5 seconds to realize what was happening before Helena's first salvo arrived. 6-inch shells crashed into his ship like the fist of God. The bridge exploded. The forward turrets disintegrated. Fire erupted from stem to stern. Niizuki's radar mast collapsed, taking the fire control system with it. Her radio room was destroyed, cutting off communication with the other destroyers. Within 90 seconds of Helena's opening salvo, Niizuki was a burning wreck, dead in the water. The American cruisers poured fire into the Japanese formation. Between Honolulu, St. Louis, and Helena, they fired close to 1,500 shells in 5 minutes. The concentrated firepower was unprecedented in naval history. Helena's gun crews worked with practiced efficiency. Load shell, close breech, fire. Eject casing, load shell. The rhythm was hypnotic, mechanical, relentless. The gun barrels glowed cherry red from the heat. Shell casings piled up so deep in the turrets that crews had to wade through them. Captain Cecil had used up all of Helena's flashless powder during the previous night's bombardment. Now, firing regular smokeless propellant, each gun flash lit up the ship like a beacon. Every time Helena fired, she announced her exact position to every Japanese ship in the Gulf. But the Japanese couldn't take advantage of this. They were dying too quickly.
Suzukaze and Tanikaze, seeing their flagship destroyed, launched 8 torpedoes toward the American line and then fled northwest, using heavy smoke to cover their escape. Both destroyers took minor hits but survived. At 0203, Ainsworth ordered his cruisers to turn right to engage the second group of Japanese destroyers racing to join the fight. 3 Japanese torpedoes, already in the water from Suzukaze or Tanikaze's earlier launch, found Helena in the turn. The first torpedo struck 150 feet from Helena's bow, about 5 feet below the waterline. The explosion was catastrophic. Every man aboard felt it, a thunderous boom that shook the entire ship, followed by the scream of tearing metal. Number 1 turret disappeared in a fireball, blown completely off the ship by the force of the magazine detonation that followed. The blast tore open the hull almost to the keel and severed the bow from the rest of the ship. Below decks, watertight bulkheads collapsed under the strain. The forward compartments flooded instantly. Men who survived the initial blast found themselves trapped in darkness as seawater poured in. But Helena didn't stop shooting. Number 2 turret continued firing. So did the aft turrets. The ship maintained 25 knots despite the bow hanging on by twisted metal. The engineering crew kept the turbines spinning, the boilers providing steam, power flowing to the guns that kept hammering Japanese destroyers. 2 minutes later, the second and third torpedoes arrived in quick succession. These hit much lower in the hull, 15 feet below the waterline, below the belt armor that might have reduced the damage. They struck the machinery spaces, the heart of the ship. The force of the explosions broke Helena's keel, the structural backbone that held the ship together. The forward engine room flooded. The forward boiler rooms flooded. The aft engine room flooded. The turbines seized. The lights went out. Captain Cecil stood on the bridge as his ship died beneath him. The list increased. The electrical power failed. Through the broken windows, he could see the Gulf water rising over the main deck. At 02:07 a.m., 4 minutes after the torpedoes hit, Cecil gave the hardest order any captain ever gives: abandon ship. With the keel broken, Helena's structural girders began to buckle. The entire center section of the ship collapsed, breaking the hull in 3 pieces. The middle section, containing the machinery spaces and most of the fuel oil, sank immediately. The bow and stern remained afloat, both pointing upward at crazy angles as they slowly filled with water. Nearly 1,000 men were in the sea, clinging to life rafts, floating debris, anything that would keep them above the waves. Ainsworth and the other captains didn't immediately realize Helena was gone. The confusion of night combat, the smoke from the guns, and the attention directed at the fleeing Japanese destroyers all conspired to hide the disaster. At 02:30 a.m., when Ainsworth tried to reorganize his force, Helena didn't respond to radio calls. The admiral ordered his ships to search for the missing cruiser. At 03:13 a.m., the destroyer Radford's radar picked up a contact. The destroyer closed with it and confirmed it was Helena's bow, pointing upward out of the water like an accusing finger. Ainsworth ordered Radford and Nicholas to immediately begin rescue operations. But dawn was coming, and with it would come Japanese aircraft. The destroyers had to pick up every survivor they could and leave before sunrise made them sitting ducks. The 2 destroyers maneuvered carefully through the debris field. Survivors flashed signals with waterproof flashlights they'd grabbed when abandoning ship. The destroyer's crews hung scramble nets over the sides, and exhausted, oil-soaked men climbed aboard. At 03:41 a.m., the rescue operation was in full swing when Nicholas's radar detected 2 contacts approaching at high speed. Suzukaze and Tanakaze had returned, searching for their flagship Niizuki, but finding American destroyers instead. Both American destroyers broke off the rescue operation to prepare for combat. The Japanese destroyers, realizing they'd stumbled into a hornet's nest, withdrew before any engagement. At 04:15 a.m., Nicholas and Radford returned to resume picking up survivors. They launched their whaleboats, small wooden boats carried on davits, to search for men in the debris field. At 05:15 a.m., another Japanese destroyer, Amagiri, appeared, also searching for Niizuki. A brief gun action ensued before Amagiri withdrew. The whaleboats continued working even as the destroyers maneuvered for combat.
At 6 a.m., with dawn breaking, Nicholas and Radford had to leave. Ainsworth's order was explicit: don't get caught by Japanese aircraft in daylight. The destroyers had picked up 735 men, 291 aboard Nicholas, 444 aboard Radford, but hundreds more remained in the water. The 2 destroyers withdrew, leaving 4 whaleboats behind to help the remaining survivors. Captain Charles Cecil had survived the sinking. When Nicholas's crew tried to pull him aboard, he refused. "I have men still in the water," he said. "I'm staying with them." Cecil took command of the 4 whaleboats Nicholas and Radford had left behind. Each wooden boat was designed to carry 20 men. Each now carried 30 or more, plus towing life rafts with additional survivors. Cecil's plan was simple but dangerous. Sail away from Japanese-occupied Kolombangara toward American-controlled New Georgia, about 7 miles away. The boats would sail during daylight, when they could navigate, then lay up at night to avoid being spotted. The journey was brutal. The tropical sun beat down mercilessly. The men had no fresh water, no food, no shelter. Many were wounded. All were exhausted. But they rowed and sailed, Cecil moving between the boats in a raft, encouraging, directing, ensuring no boat became overloaded and capsized. After hours of sailing, the boats reached what they hoped was American territory, the Menakasapa Peninsula on New Georgia's northwestern coast. The men waded ashore through the surf, collapsed on the beach, and waited for dawn to determine their next move. Cecil counted his survivors. 88. Not enough. Hundreds were still missing. While Cecil's flotilla sailed to New Georgia, other groups of Helena survivors remained in the Gulf. Some clung to the still-floating bow section. Others floated on life rafts, on debris, on anything that kept them above the waves. A B-24 Liberator bomber, searching the Gulf at low altitude, spotted men on the bow and dropped 3 life rafts. One sank, but 2 reached survivors. The bomber's crew radioed the position before heading back to base. The survivors faced a nightmare. No food, no fresh water. The sun burned them during the day. At night, temperatures plummeted, and men shivered uncontrollably in their wet clothes. Sharks circled the rafts. Men began to hallucinate from dehydration. On July 7th, a group of about 50 men tried to paddle 2 rafts to Kolombangara, but the current was too strong. They were swept west instead, toward Vela, another island, but this one was enemy-occupied. Other groups followed, some by choice, others carried by currents. On July 7th and 8th, small groups of Helena survivors made landfall on Vela's beaches. They were greeted by Solomon Islanders, native people who served as coast watchers for the Allies. These brave men and women, risking execution if discovered by the Japanese, had been reporting enemy movements and rescuing downed Allied pilots for months. The islanders pulled exhausted Americans from the surf, hid them from Japanese patrols, and contacted the Coast Watcher station. 3 groups formed, one of 104 men, another of 50, and a third of 11. All were hidden in the island's interior while Coast Watchers radioed Guadalcanal. We have 165 Helena survivors. Request immediate extraction. At Allied headquarters on Guadalcanal, Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner faced a problem. Rescuing 165 men from an enemy-occupied island was unprecedented. PT boats could carry maybe a dozen men each. Submarines were too slow and too few. Turner decided on a bold plan, use 2 destroyer transports, fast ships designed to carry troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. The force would penetrate deep into enemy waters, closer to Japanese bases than any Allied naval force had yet dared. The operation was scheduled for July 12th, but was postponed when Japanese ships were detected in the area. The delay led to the Second Battle of Kula Gulf, another fierce night action. Finally, on the night of July 15th-16th, the rescue force departed. 4 destroyers took up defensive positions to the northwest, while the rest steamed through Vela Gulf. At 05:55 a.m. on July 16th, Helena survivors flashed the recognition signal from the beach. 3 Higgins boats, the same landing craft used for amphibious assaults, launched from the destroyer transports and began ferrying men from shore to ship. The Higgins boats made multiple trips, picking up not just Helena survivors, but also a downed American pilot and a captured Japanese pilot the Coast Watchers had been holding. Several Chinese merchants and their families, knowing they'd face execution if the Japanese discovered they'd hidden Americans, were also evacuated. By dawn, all 165 men were aboard. The flotilla raced back to Tulagi,
arriving that afternoon.
When the final count was taken, 1,031 of Helena's crew had survived out of approximately 1,200, but 168 men were dead, killed in the battle, drowned in the sinking, or lost during the days in the water. USS Helena sank on July 6, 1943, but her legacy lived on in every American cruiser that followed. The Battle of Cape Esperance demonstrated that radar-directed night fire control could defeat an enemy that couldn't see in the dark. The naval battle of Guadalcanal proved that rate of fire could overwhelm even battleships, and Kula Gulf showed that American technology had transformed naval warfare forever. The Japanese never developed radar fire control equivalent to American systems. Their night fighting doctrine, which had dominated early war battles, became obsolete the moment Helena's guns opened up at Cape Esperance. Every American cruiser built after 1942 incorporated lessons from Helena's service. Radar became standard. Fire control systems improved. The rate of fire became the defining characteristic of American naval gunnery. The Brooklyn-class cruisers, initially seen as treaty compromises, proved to be war winners. They fought in every major Pacific naval battle. They survived kamikaze attacks that would have destroyed lesser ships, and they demonstrated that sometimes speed of fire matters more than size of shell. But technology alone doesn't win wars. Men do. Captain Cecil, who refused rescue to stay with his men. The gun crews who kept firing even as their ship was sinking. The coast watchers who risked everything to save strangers. The Solomon Islanders who hid American sailors from enemy patrols. The destroyer crews who came back repeatedly under threat of air attack to pull men from the sea. Helena's story is their story. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things when everything was on the line. In 2018, 75 years after she sank, the wreck of USS Helena was located by Paul Allen's research vessel Petrel. She lies in Kula Gulf at a depth of over 3,000 feet, her hull broken but still recognizable. Her guns point outward, frozen in the act of firing at an enemy that no longer exists. The discovery brought closure to the few remaining survivors and their families. Helena had been found. She wasn't forgotten. On the night of July 6, 1943, a Japanese admiral learned what American technology could do. His flagship was destroyed before he could react. His carefully planned reinforcement mission became a disaster, and he went to his grave knowing that the age of Japanese naval dominance in night combat was over. USS Helena fired 1,500 shells in 5 minutes that night. Her guns spoke with mechanical precision, each shot directed by radar that could see through darkness. When Japanese torpedoes finally silenced those guns, they couldn't silence the lesson Helena had taught. The night belonged to America now, and it would stay that way until the war was won.